Weimar Republic, Germany, in the bleak November of 1923. The economic landscape had spiraled into utter madness, where the staggering price of a single loaf of bread now demanded a mind-boggling 200 billion marks. A lifetime's worth of diligent savings, carefully accumulated and held in the national currency, vanished into thin air, unable to even secure the most basic necessities for survival. A bank balance that just 5 years prior, in 1918, might have comfortably afforded a family home in a peaceful neighborhood, now struggled to purchase even a single daily baguette. In a mere half-decade, a once stable and trusted currency had devolved into little more than decorative paper, its purchasing power utterly obliterated. Yet, amidst this financial maelstrom, a remarkable truth emerged: some individuals not only weathered the storm but astonishingly found ways to prosper. Their survival wasn't a product of prescient predictions or fortunate guesswork about the impending economic unraveling. Instead, it stemmed from an unwavering adherence to timeless, fundamental principles, enduring truths that prove effective across every conceivable collapse, transcending specific triggers, geographical boundaries, or historical epochs. Fast forward to Argentina, 2001. A different continent, a different era, but the same terrifying pattern began to unfold. The peso currency was abruptly frozen, and banks slammed shut, denying citizens access to their own deposits, their financial lifelines severed without warning. In a brazen act, the government confiscated all dollar accounts, forcibly converting them into pesos at a preposterously rigged exchange rate. Overnight, an average individual witnessed a devastating 66% of their hard-earned savings evaporate into nothingness. Yet, even in this modern financial calamity, a select few managed to survive. They were guided by the very same principles that had offered a lifeline to people in Weimar Germany, in ancient Rome, and in every other historical collapse imaginable. Now, let's cast our gaze towards America, year 2025. The nation groans under the crushing weight of a national debt nearing an astronomical $36 trillion. The very currency underpinning daily life has quietly hemorrhaged 98% of its purchasing power since its inception in 1913. In a frantic attempt to prop up the system, the Federal Reserve unleashed an unprecedented $5 trillion into the economy in just 2 short years. The warning signs are undeniable. The current financial system appears to be tracing the exact same perilous pattern that has historically preceded every single currency collapse known to humankind. When this inevitable collapse arrives, whether it manifests in 5 years or 15, the very same enduring principles will serve as the stark differentiator between those who survive, adapt, and rebuild, and those who tragically lose absolutely everything. Presented here are the 5 immutable financial principles that have consistently proven their resilience through every recorded economic collapse throughout history. We will delve into precisely why these principles continue to function when all other conventional wisdom spectacularly fails, illustrate them with specific, irrefutable historical examples, and, most critically, reveal how you can strategically apply them to your own financial life right now, before this critical window of opportunity irrevocably closes. Understanding and implementing these principles isn't about chasing untold riches or instant wealth. It is, fundamentally, about safeguarding what you have and preventing the catastrophic loss of everything you've worked for. Because in the crucible of every economic collapse, the vast majority of people lose everything they possess. This isn't because they are foolish or unintelligent, but rather because they instinctively cling to conventional tactics that are perfectly effective during periods of stability and normalcy, yet fail with utterly devastating consequences when confronted by a genuine crisis. These 5 principles have been proven to work in the heart of the Roman Empire, they worked amidst the chaos of Weimar Germany, and they will undoubtedly prove their efficacy in the unfolding future of America. Before we illuminate these 5 foundational principles, it is absolutely crucial that you grasp the profound difference and superior importance of principles over mere tactics. A tactic, by its very nature, is a piece of highly specific, often prescriptive advice: buy gold now, or sell all your stocks immediately. Such tactical recommendations might yield positive results, or they might not. Their success hinges precariously on a myriad of fleeting variables: perfect market timing, the precise nature of the collapse, and literally 1,000 other unpredictable factors. A principle, conversely, is a fundamental, unchanging truth that operates universally, regardless of external conditions. Principles were effective in ancient Rome, where gold served as the primary form of money. They were equally effective in Weimar Germany, where paper currency reigned supreme, albeit briefly. And they will, without question, hold true in America, whether the impending collapse takes the form of hyperinflation, deflationary spirals, or a complete currency reset. The vast majority of conventional financial advice offered today is inherently tactical. Invest in this particular stock, or allocate 60% of your portfolio to stocks and 40% to bonds. These well-meaning tactics operate under a crucial, yet often unstated, assumption that the existing financial system will continue to function more or less as it always has. They assume banks will remain solvent and operational. They assume governments will honor their contracts and obligations. They assume property rights will be rigorously enforced by a functioning legal system. In a true collapse, however, every single one of these fundamental assumptions shatters. The principles, however, remain steadfast and unbroken. Principle 1: Hard assets survive. Paper burns. When a currency collapses into worthlessness, when governments inevitably default on their promises, when the intricate machinery of the financial system grinds to a catastrophic halt, physical assets, those tangible things you can see, touch, and hold, retain their intrinsic value precisely because they are real. Conversely, paper assets, anything that represents a mere claim on something else, a promise written on paper, plummet to zero, because the underlying claim becomes utterly unenforceable. Consider Weimar Germany, between 1918 and 1923. If you had held a substantial 100,000 marks in a bank account in 1918, you would have been considered a person of considerable wealth. By 1923, however, that very same 100,000 marks couldn't even procure a single loaf of bread. The currency had inflated itself into absolute worthlessness, and all paper wealth, your bank accounts, your bonds, your paper investments, had vaporized completely. But those individuals who wisely owned hard assets such as land, buildings, or productive factories managed to survive the financial deluge. A farm in 1918 remained a farm in 1923. It continued to yield the same essential food, possessing the exact same real-world value. While its price in marks might have ludicrously soared from 100,000 to 100 trillion, the farm itself, its substance and productivity, remained utterly unchanged. Look to Zimbabwe in the 2000s, where hyperinflation reached a mind-boggling 79.6 billion% per month by November 2008. If your life savings were denominated in Zimbabwean dollars, they swiftly became utterly worthless. But again, those who possess tangible assets like farmland, livestock, or essential equipment effectively preserved their wealth. The land continued to produce food, the animals continued to provide sustenance, regardless of the catastrophic fate of the national currency. Then there's Argentina, 2001 to 2002. The government, in a desperate move, froze all bank accounts before forcibly converting dollar deposits into pesos at an unfavorable rate of 1.4 pesos to $1. The peso then immediately plummeted further, reaching 4 pesos to $1. Across these three distinct collapses, Weimar, Zimbabwe, Argentina, the same principle holds true: hard assets endure, while paper assets inevitably burn. In America, 2025, the overwhelming majority of personal wealth is currently held in various forms of paper assets, stocks, bonds, retirement accounts, and bank deposits. Each of these represents nothing more than a claim. A stock is a claim on corporate earnings. A bond is a claim on future repayment. A bank deposit is simply a claim on the bank's promise to return your money. In times of stability, these claims typically work as intended. But in the midst of a genuine collapse, the entire system ceases to function. Courts become overwhelmed and ineffective. Banks fail en masse. Governments default on their obligations. Markets freeze entirely. Under such conditions, those meticulously documented paper claims become utterly worthless. Yet, hard assets remain. Real estate continues to be real estate. Gold is still gold, a tangible store of value. A farm still produces food and sustenance. These assets possess intrinsic value, entirely independent of the capricious financial system. When the collapse inevitably arrives, paper will burn, but hard assets will survive. Principle 2: Own productive assets, not speculative assets. This principle draws a critical distinction between assets that inherently produce genuine value and assets whose perceived value exists solely because someone else might, at some unspecified future point, be willing to pay more for them. Productive assets continuously generate income, essential food, or practical utility, entirely independent of fluctuating market sentiment or what anyone else might believe their worth to be. Speculative assets, on the other hand, derive their value almost entirely from the hope that you can successfully sell them at a higher price later. Consider the Great Depression, specifically the period between 1929 and 1933, when the stock market suffered a devastating collapse of 89%. If you own stocks primarily for speculative purposes, you likely lost almost everything you had invested. However, if you directly owned productive assets such as a working farm, a rental property that generated income, or a viable business, you continued to receive the invaluable production those assets generated. A farm consistently produced food that you could either consume or sell. A rental property provided essential housing that people desperately needed. Productive assets inherently generate value, entirely independent of their market price fluctuations. A farm will produce food whether the stock market index is at 381 or 41. Speculative assets only hold value if there are willing buyers. And in a collapse, buyers are nowhere to be found. Look at Venezuela in the 2010s. The stock market, in a bizarre twist of hyperinflationary logic, surged by a staggering 100,000% in local currency terms. This might sound like an incredible gain until you realize that the bolivar, the national currency, had simultaneously lost an astronomical 99.9% of its value. Yet, individuals who owned productive assets, farms, bakeries, transportation businesses, not only survived but, relatively speaking, thrived. A bakery consistently produced bread, a staple that people desperately needed and valued. The bakery actively created tangible value for its community. Contrast this with Venezuelan government bonds, whose value rested solely on the government's promise to honor them. The government defaulted, and the bonds instantly became worthless. In America, 2025, the vast majority of assets held by individuals are fundamentally speculative. The value of the S&P 500, for instance, is primarily upheld by the collective belief that it will continue to appreciate. Bitcoin, while revolutionary, intrinsically produces nothing. Its value is predominantly driven by the belief that others will pay more for it in the future. Even much of residential real estate is treated as a speculative asset, bought with the intention to flip or simply to appreciate in market value. Productive assets are fundamentally different. A farm that actively grows food is undeniably productive. A rental property that you own free and clear, without a mortgage, is a productive asset, generating income and shelter. A business that manufactures goods or provides services that people genuinely need is productive. When the collapse comes, it is imperative to own things that actually produce value. The farm will feed you and your family. Speculation, in contrast, will feed nothing but regret. Principle 3, debt destroys you. In collapse, even good debt. In periods of economic stability, debt is often hailed as a powerful tool for leverage. You borrow to purchase a house, it appreciates in value, and you consequently profit handsomely. But in the harsh reality of a collapse, every form of debt transmutes into bad debt. Your income dramatically drops or vanishes entirely, yet your debt obligations remain fixed and relentless. The bank still demands its payments. If you cannot pay, they will swiftly seize the asset you borrowed to acquire. Consider the Great Depression, particularly the plight of farmers. Many had borrowed heavily to expand their operations during the boom years of the 1920s, a period when land prices were steadily rising, making borrowing seem like a sound, rational decision. Then, the seismic shock of 1929 hit. Crop prices plummeted, and farm income catastrophically fell by 50 to 70%. But the bank debt did not magically decrease. Between 1930 and 1935, a staggering figure, over 750,000 farms, were foreclosed upon. Families who had owned their land for generations, whose livelihoods were intricately tied to the soil, lost absolutely everything due to the crushing weight of their debt. Compare this tragic outcome to farmers who owned their land outright, free and clear of debt. They undoubtedly struggled immensely, prices were terrible, and life was hard, but they survived. Without the burden of constant debt payments, they could subsist on whatever their farm produced, weathering the storm. Debt-free farmers survived, indebted farmers lost everything. Argentina, 2001, provides another stark illustration. Middle-class families found themselves trapped with mortgages denominated in US dollars. When the peso collapsed, their peso-denominated incomes fell by a brutal 66%, but their mortgage payments, fixed in dollars, remained stubbornly unchanged. People's ability to pay their debt fell by two-thirds, yet their payment obligation did not budge. They simply couldn't pay, and banks foreclosed. People lost homes they had been diligently paying on for 10 or 15 years. Meanwhile, those who owned their homes free and clear kept their roofs over their heads. Same crisis, same precipitous drop in income, but the absence of debt meant the absence of foreclosure. Greece, in the 2010s, offers yet another somber example. Incomes across the nation fell by 30 to 40%, and pensions, a lifeline for many, were slashed by 50%. Yet, individuals burdened with mortgages still owed the very same amount. Default rates spiked dramatically, and debt once again proved to be the destroyer of financial stability and dreams. In America, 2025, the collective household debt stands at an alarming $17 trillion. This includes $12 trillion in mortgages, $6 trillion in auto loans, $6 trillion in student loans, and $1 trillion in credit card debt. When the inevitable crisis descends, this colossal mountain of debt will crush millions of families, destroying their futures and their security. The counterargument often heard is that inflation will ultimately benefit debtors, as their fixed debt will decrease in real terms. If you owe $300,000 and inflation runs at 20%, your debt does indeed decrease in real terms. This theoretical benefit, however, holds true only if your income manages to keep pace with or exceed inflation. In the reality of genuine collapses, it almost never does. The only truly safe financial position is to have zero debt. Own your assets free and clear. If you own a house with a mortgage, you don't actually own a house, you own a highly leveraged bet that house prices will remain high and your income will remain steady. If you own a house free and clear, you unequivocally own a house. Period. No bank, no crisis, no default can ever take it from you. Debt is leverage in times of expansion, but debt is suicide in times of collapse. Principle 4, skills are the only truly portable wealth. Every other conceivable form of wealth can be taken from you. Land can be seized or confiscated by authorities. Gold can be confiscated by decree. Money can be inflated away into worthlessness. Businesses can be nationalized by a desperate government. But the skills you possess, the knowledge and abilities within your brain, stay with you, perpetually. They cannot be taxed, confiscated, or inflated away. Consider the horrors of the Holocaust. Jewish families, once prosperous, owned vast properties, thriving businesses, and substantial wealth, all systematically confiscated by the Nazi regime. Yet, the Jews who managed to survive often did so precisely because of their invaluable skills. Doctors, engineers, craftsmen, tailors, people with practical, tangible skills could still work. They could barter their labor for essential food, for protection, or for passage. And critically, they could rebuild their lives and contribute meaningfully in new countries after their harrowing ordeal. The wealthy merchant who owned extensive property but possessed no practical skills often starved. The skilled craftsman who owned nothing but knew how to build, to fix, to create, not only survived but eventually rebuilt his life and his community. The Soviet Union, during its tumultuous early years from 1917 to 1922, saw the Bolsheviks ruthlessly seize all private property. Aristocrats who had owned vast estates and commanded immense wealth lost everything overnight. But engineers, doctors, and skilled industrial workers retained their inherent value. The nascent Soviet state, for all its ideological purity, desperately needed them to function. Their skills provided them with a unique form of leverage, even under the iron fist of communism. The aristocrat who owned 10,000 acres but lacked the practical knowledge to farm it perished. The humble blacksmith who owned nothing but could forge essential tools survived and continued to be indispensable. Vietnam, 1975. When Saigon famously fell, millions of people were forced to flee their homes and their country. They could not take their property with them. They could not take their businesses. The Vietnamese refugees who most successfully rebuilt their lives in America, within a single generation, were overwhelmingly those who possessed transferable skills: doctors, engineers, accountants, mechanics. They arrived on foreign shores with absolutely nothing but the invaluable skills they carried in their minds and hands. In America, 2025, the majority of personal wealth is tied up in financial assets and real estate. These forms of wealth are inherently not portable. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need to leave quickly, you cannot take your house with you. You might not even be able to access or take your money if severe capital controls are implemented. The skills residing in your head are, therefore, the only truly guaranteed portable wealth. Yet, ironically, most modern Americans possess few, if any, practical, hands-on skills. Can you grow your own food? Can you effectively repair machines? Can you construct basic shelter? Can you provide fundamental medical care? These are not niche hobbies, these are profoundly valuable skills in every conceivable economy, whether it is stable and thriving or in utter collapse. Cultivate and develop skills that produce tangible value, independent of complex, fragile systems. Skills are the bedrock of rebuildable wealth. Everything else, eventually, can be taken away. Principle 5. Local trust networks outlast all institutions. When complex systems utterly collapse, institutions inevitably fail. Banks close their doors for good. Governments lose their authority and their ability to govern. Police forces become unable to enforce laws, plunging communities into chaos. The entire, intricate institutional framework that underpins modern society breaks down completely. But amidst this disintegration, local networks of trusted relationships stubbornly endure and become the new currency of survival. Consider the chaotic collapse of the Soviet Union between 1991 and 1998. The Soviet government officially dissolved, the national currency became utterly worthless, pensions ceased to be paid, and vital supply chains snapped, leaving grocery stores barren and empty. Russians survived this profound societal upheaval through the resilience of their local networks. Families shared scarce resources. Neighbors engaged in direct bartering of goods and services. Communities organized their own security and shared what little they had. The people who navigated this crisis most successfully were not necessarily the wealthiest or most powerful, they were the individuals deeply embedded in strong, reciprocal local networks. The isolated individual, with a now worthless stack of money in a defunct bank account, often starved. The connected person, with established relationships and reciprocal trust, thrived. Argentina, 2001, provides another example. When the banks closed their doors, neighborhood assemblies spontaneously formed. People organized at the local level to barter for goods, share essential resources, and provide collective security for their communities. These informal, organic networks quickly became far more vital and effective than the paralyzed government itself. Individuals who were embedded in these robust local networks could trade their skills for food, their labor for necessary goods. Lebanon, from 2019 to the present day, offers a contemporary case study. The Lebanese pound has lost over 90% of its value. Banks have closed indefinitely. The government has become deeply dysfunctional and effectively powerless. Yet, Lebanon, despite the severity of its crisis, has not descended into absolute anarchy. Why? Because Lebanese society is profoundly organized around powerful family and religious community networks. These deep-rooted networks provide essential services, security, and support that the government simply cannot. Before the advent of modern, large-scale institutions, all economic activity, all trade, and all survival happened through these fundamental trust networks. You traded with people you knew and trusted. You borrowed from individuals who knew you and believed you would repay. Modern institutions allowed us to scale beyond these local trust boundaries. But when those institutions inevitably fail, we revert to the ancient, proven power of trust networks. In America, 2025, most people are institutionally embedded but locally isolated. You may have multiple bank accounts, but you might not even know the names of your immediate neighbors. You rely entirely on massive retail chains like Walmart for your food, but you have no connection to local farmers or food producers. You rely on police forces for security, but you have no deep understanding of your own neighborhood or its needs. This dependence on distant, complex institutions is catastrophically fragile. When those institutions ultimately fail, you will have no local fallback. Begin building local networks now. Get to know your neighbors deeply. Develop reciprocal relationships of mutual aid and support. Embed yourself actively within a community. As institutional trust inevitably erodes and fails, local trust becomes exponentially more valuable. The person with strong, resilient local networks will survive. The isolated individual will struggle immensely, and often perish. These, then, are the 5 immutable principles: hard assets survive, paper burns. Own productive assets, not speculative ones. Debt destroys you in a collapse. Skills are the only truly portable wealth. And local trust networks will outlast all formal institutions. Notice what is conspicuously absent from this list. There is no mention of which specific stocks to buy, which cryptocurrency to hold, or whether gold or silver is the superior metal. These are mere tactics, prone to failure and dependent on myriad conditions. The principles, by contrast, work regardless of such specifics. They worked in ancient Rome. They worked in Weimar Germany. They will work in America. And the profound beauty of these principles lies in their independence from perfect timing. You do not need to possess the ability to predict the exact moment the collapse will arrive. Instead, you strategically position yourself according to principles that have proven to survive every collapse. Own hard assets instead of ephemeral paper wealth. The collapse might come in 2030 or 2040, it genuinely doesn't matter. Hard assets will preserve your wealth in both stable times and during a crisis. Own productive assets. If the system remains stable, productive assets generate consistent income. If it collapses, you still possess the fundamental means of production. Eliminate all debt. In stable times, being debt-free provides profound resilience and peace of mind. In a collapse, you will survive while debtors lose absolutely everything. Develop valuable skills. In stable times, skills increase your income and opportunities. In a collapse, those skills become your sole portable wealth, your very means of survival. Build robust local networks. In stable times, you enjoy the richness of community and mutual support. In a collapse, you possess a vital survival infrastructure. These principles are not just safeguards for a potential future catastrophe, they actively improve your life right now, while simultaneously protecting you for whatever lies ahead. The critical mistake most people make is passively waiting for absolute certainty. They yearn to know the precise date and nature of the collapse. But collapses, by their very nature, do not politely announce themselves in advance. By the time the signs are undeniably obvious to everyone, it will be far too late to act effectively. The true genius of diligently following these principles is that they do not demand any form of prediction. You strategically position your life and your resources according to what has consistently survived every collapse in history, and in doing so, you are protected, regardless of the exact timing of the crisis. These 5 principles are ancient truths, having survived and proven their worth over 3,000 years, precisely because they are fundamentally true in every conceivable economic system, from the Roman Empire to medieval Europe, through the Industrial Revolution, and into modern America. The principles themselves do not change because human nature, with its desires and fears, does not change, and the immutable laws of mathematics do not change. When debt burdens demonstrably exceed the ability to repay, collapse inevitably follows. When a currency is recklessly debased, paper wealth, without fail, evaporates. When institutions falter and fail, local trust networks become the paramount mechanism for survival. These are not mere predictions of the future, they are deeply ingrained patterns that have repeated themselves hundreds of times across millennia. The American collapse, when it comes, will undoubtedly follow these very same patterns. While the specific tactics that prove effective in this particular crisis will be unique to our specific situation, the underlying principles will remain steadfast. Hard assets will survive. Productive assets will generate value. Debt will destroy. Skills will be portable. Local networks will outlast institutions. Position yourself according to these timeless principles now. And you will be among those who survive what is coming. Ignore them and instead cling to mere tactics, and you are gambling your entire future on the impossible bet that you can time the collapse perfectly. That is a bet that most people tragically lose. If this message has profoundly shown you that principles truly matter more than fleeting tactics, that the same 5 principles have indeed survived every single collapse in recorded history, and that you possess the power to position yourself advantageously right now, without needing to predict exact timing, then I urge you to subscribe. Because the next video will delve into the specific, actionable tactics that align seamlessly with these enduring principles for 2025 America. We will explore which hard assets make the most sense in a rapidly digitizing economy, which productive assets genuinely generate value in modern markets, how to strategically and effectively eliminate debt, which specific skills are currently most valuable and in demand, and how to effectively build robust local networks in an increasingly isolated society. The principles tell you what to do to survive. The tactics will show you how to do it. These 5 principles worked in Rome, in Weimar, in Argentina, and in every collapse in between. They will work in America. The only crucial question remaining is whether you will choose to follow them before this vital window of opportunity closes, or whether you will be left wishing you had, long after it is too late.